Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Draft. I'm really excited about this episode. We're going to be taking mailbag questions, and we got some really good ones today, Frankie. So I'm excited to get into that for sure. Like some really good questions, honestly. Some from multiple people I really respect, other Bronco analysts and stuff like that, which is exciting. I mean, doing a draft podcast and getting questions from people like this is fun, and I'm excited to get into it. But Frankie, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to get into the questions, like you said. Shout out to everybody who sent some in. It's been awesome to see the response. And everybody who's been tuning into the pod every week, or whenever you get the opportunity to. So,
Yes,
like
sir.
you said, I'm excited to get into it. Draft season is upon us as usual, and I'm excited to dive into more positions next week. And let's get. How's your day been?
Dude, I've had a good day. I've had a really good day, actually. Good day of work. Just hung out, was studying some of these questions. Definitely wrote them down. I was happy to get these in earlier in the week. Good plan, Frankie. Shout out to you, so that I was able to study this. Let's Talk Broncos. We always just take them last minute. It's on accident most of the time, but it was good being able to sit there and like actually study these questions and come with some good takes. I think that are good takes, and I'm excited to hear your opinion on some of these. So let's get straight into it. The first question I want to get into, Frankie, is from Nick Kendall. Shout out to Nick Kendall at Mile High Huddle. He said, make the case for a defensive player. I think this is a really intriguing question because the Broncos have so many offensive needs. Like, it feels like nobody's even thinking about drafting a defensive guy. Or honestly, like it's rare you ever hear anybody bring up the name in Broncos country of a defensive player. So make the case. Why would you draft a defensive player, or is there a scenario where you would?
So let me hear how did you take it as a defensive player, like you had to pick one and kind of make the case for that guy, or just a defensive player in general?
Just a defensive player in general.
No problem.
That's the way I did it. Yeah. But how did you do it?
So I think we can kind of do both, but if you don't have a guy, like I could try to like think of a guy really quick. But as far as getting a defensive player, man, I think it's pretty easy. Like, I think that there's a lot of belief that, the first round pick especially is going to be used to draft the savior of this offense. I think that's kind of the hope. And I think that the reality is that's very unlikely with where the pick will end up being, with what first round picks typically are, and especially the positions that Denver really needs along the offense. Usually first-year offensive tackles aren't the best thing you want to have, like a lot of things like that, where I think when you look on the defensive side of the ball, there are some definite holes that are going to need filling, and just like some stuff that you'd really like to see Denver do on the defensive side to add. I think whether you see them add a deep safety is a thing that I would love to see them add this season. I think we're seeing Kareem Jackson we've said it for like 4 seasons now, and then at the last second every offseason, he signs back to Denver. I know a lot of people love Caden Stearns. I love Caden Stearns. Caden Stearns had injury concerns coming out of college, and he had to pretty much miss this entire season with his hip thing. While I still think he has the potential to be a good player and even a starter, I think it's very unwise to go into next season looking at him to be, the guy we can have be the starter. We can't pencil him in as the starter next season when we don't know what his availability is going to be like straight up, So I think safety is an easy position to argue for right there. And I think you could even make an argument that defensive line and edge, as crazy it is, and something that pains me so much. If we ended up trading Bradley Chubb and we just used the pick to get, a hopeful Bradley Chubb, but on a cheap contract, I don't think that's the best use of your capital. But I think that's kind of the case that's there. And I think that when you look at the coaching, if you were to talk about players we can trust to get developed in the right way, as we've seen, Denver has a great record of making players on the defense get better year in and year out. We can't say that same for the offense. So I think that's the case for me, at least right there. What about you?
Yeah. Okay. You make a very intriguing case there. Nick Kendall asked this question, and he was also the one that pointed this out. So I'm going to steal one of his things. Todd McShay dropped a mock draft recently where they had the Broncos drafting Gibbs. I wouldn't draft Gibbs in the first
round. I would not draft Gibbs either. Yeah.
And looking at his draft board, the Broncos are in a scenario where it's not like they get to have their picking of anybody, right? Like they weren't. Like I think they're slated at like pick 25 or it's somewhere around there. The best player available, the best 5 players available may just not be defensive players or offensive players. And if you can't trade back, are you willing to go, okay, I'm going to go draft what we evaluate as the 6th best player on the board, the 7th best player on the board? Or am I going to take this defensive player that I think is a stud? Because I think people forget about this, but first round pick, guys, it is a long-term investment. It's not just for right now. It's for the future. I have this guy locked up for potentially 5 years. I get a 5th-year option on him, drafting him in the in the first round. And I that's just kind of my take there. It's like, hey, I'm not willing to sacrifice greatly if the best player available I do really, really like. I'm just not willing to sacrifice that much just so I could help me right now. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that, Frankie?
No, I think I completely agree. And I mean, like, it's just such a thing of like, when you look at the value in the league and what Denver already has, I mean, I think it's a little bit underrated to say that they have this great defensive unit. A lot of their defensive players are getting up there in age too. I think outside of a lot of the like few core starters you can rely on. I mean, even the guys like Justin Simmons are getting closer to 30 in age, where I think I don't think it's the worst decision in the world. And I think you're completely right, where the top of this draft class isn't super heavy in these blue chip prospects, where the 49ers actually look pretty decent right now. If Brock Purdy can put together a good end of the season, they're not going to be in a spot where like they get to have their pick of the litter of these great options. Like you look back last year, once it got past like pick 14 and Kyle Hamilton, it really started to fall off a cliff of the talent that was available. So it really comes down to, what Denver can see helping them the most over the next 5 years, not just the next, 1 or 2 seasons with Russ. I think that's a big thing people need to look at too. This isn't Madden where, that offensive tackle you draft can hopefully have, be a high enough overall that he can lock it up for the season. You need a guy that's going to be able to have that 5th-year option that you hopefully want to be able to pick up, a guy that will continuously develop, and a guy that you guys just believe in as a whole to be a talented player, not just we need X position, so we grab Y player at position X.
1,000%. Like, you would just rather have the good player than the guy that you think is more likely to maybe be a bust. You know what I mean? Because that's really what this comes down to. Like, a lot of it is like, if you're looking at this from I want to draft, and I've always found that more than a lot of people, I'm a floor guy. I like having a high floor. I like getting good football players in. I understand a lot of it, but so there's so much variance and stuff that I can't predict with the players that are I'm drafting purely off potential, which is like a big deal, right? Like there's so many guys that go in the first round that you're drafting purely off traits, or it feels like you're almost drafting purely off traits.
Yeah. If you run near that 4-3 record, you're probably going to be like a top 20 pick every year. It feels like, it'll be that guy who's like an unknown. It'll probably be like a Jalen Hyatt this year, who's probably a bit more known. But, that's a great example of it, where people see that ceiling and they're like, well, he could be the fastest player on the field at all times. It's like, well, he might not have hamstrings most of the season.
Right. So. Right. And if it came down to it, I would rather be like, I'm going to draft a player that's least likely to be a bust, even if he is the defensive player, than a guy that's on offense that I think has a higher bust probability. I don't really believe in the guy all that much, which is a scenario that could happen with the Broncos being in the position that they are. Guys, they don't have a top 10 pick. They don't have the luxury of being like, hey, we could draft a good offensive player and a good or a good defensive player. Like, hey, it may come down to it, like I said earlier, where I have 6 or 7 defensive players ranked ahead of my top offensive players. So I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. It sounds like Frankie agrees there. And that would kind of be my case if the Broncos were the drafted defensive player. I want to throw out there, though, Frankie, interior defensive line is also a position that I could see them going in a scenario like this, especially with Draymond Jones up on a contract year. That seems very much up in the air with some of his recent comments on how he feels.
Yeah, there's been the talk that like he hasn't restarted his contract talks up yet, and I mean it's always great to be able to have a guy on the tag, but I mean like you're saying, I mean we don't know that this front seven. I have it written down right here. I think they're going to need a presence up front. They're really lacking in that right now. I think Draymond Jones is a presence, but we don't know how long he's going to be there, and he can't be your only guy.
He can't. Then even if you were, let's say that you figured out a Draymond Jones extension after a franchise tag, right? Let's go under the scenario that the Broncos do draft an interior defensive lineman. Broncos franchise tag Draymond Jones. There's nothing wrong with having a really, really good interior defensive line. No. These guys rotate. They're all over the place. And it's kind of a win.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know,
a huge loss.
With Mike Purcell, I know, like, Mike Purcell's a little bit up there in age. Mike Purcell has been absolutely incredible this season, though. So if Denver has the opportunity to bring him back, they absolutely should. But I don't know what his contract's like. I think he signed a 3-year deal probably 2 years ago.
Last time,
Was it last year? Okay.
No. He signed it 3 years. Last contract is what
last contract was 3 years. So I think that's probably coming up soon, where it might be getting to the world where they consider cutting him, or it might end up that he's a free agent after this year anyway. I don't know off the top of my head. And this, I will say, is actually a solid interior defensive line class. I think it's very underrated. There's a lot of prospects I really like, and just there's a lot of good block eaters in the middle this year. That if that was a decision that they had to make, like, there aren't a ton of solidified bodies in this defensive line. And I think we've seen Deshaun Williams have some flashes, but he's not a consistent player. I think we like what Matt Henningsen has done this year as for what he was as a pick, but I don't think he's necessarily a guy we can go forward, relying on. I don't think we believe in what Jonathan Harris has necessarily done too much. And we haven't really seen Uwazurike get on the field this year. So I think what you're saying is completely accurate, where interior defensive line could definitely be a huge need.
Totally. So let's move on to the next one here. This one's funny.
Shout out Nick Kendall for the question.
Shout out Nick Kendall. From Nick Kendall to @Bronco_hater. Can you see any wide receiver becoming available in a trade that Broncos can use a first-round pick on? I when I was reading this, I was kind of confused on if this meant.
It's funny. I actually like this because, not to go too much, I was thinking about this in the shower earlier today because I was thinking about Trevor Lawrence in the shower, as I tend to do. I was like, man, if T-Law can just get that number one receiver, I really think the Jaguars offense is going to be ridiculous. And I was like, who is that guy that they can do like the AJ Brown-esque trade with to get a guy? I guess it kind of fits for Denver as well. I wonder if the Cardinals are a team that might look to move on from DeAndre Hopkins. Was a guy I was considering. I think he's a target a lot of teams maybe could look at, just because I know Cliff isn't guaranteed after this year. I'm pretty sure I don't know exactly what's going on with their GM, but like I think that's a team that could maybe look to move on from DeAndre Hopkins, which I think DeAndre Hopkins is still obviously one of those guys that everyone can agree is one of those receivers that you don't want to get rid of, but if you can get for your team is very good. The Raiders have made Devontae Adams an offensive player of the year, but it seems like they don't really have the ability to keep him, and they might be trading Derek Carr, where I kind of have the question like, wait, part of the reason Devontae Adams wanted to go to Vegas was he liked Derek Carr, and I feel like now after the season, we don't know if Derek Carr is going to be there, and it's like, is he going to want to be there? He just left Aaron Rodgers. That's kind of funny. He might be kind of fried now. He could maybe be a target I've been considering, but I don't really know. Do you have anyone off the top of your head you can think? I guess they got Calvin Ridley, though. I completely forgot that the Jaguars got Calvin Ridley.
They got Calvin Ridley now, but who knows how Calvin Ridley looks? Like, you know what I mean? Like, he was traded for, I think, definitely a lower amount than what he would have been traded for before the suspension. And that's for a reason, right? It was because he sat out that entire year.
Yeah.
But no one comes off the top of my head, but I will say I didn't know how to take this question. I didn't know whether it was already an established player or if this meant that I'm trading up for somebody in the draft. I didn't know how to read this. So I'll take the other angle on it. You did we're trading a first round pick for a player already in the league. I'll go take the angle that they're trading up for a wide receiver. And I don't think that it would be a good decision. I just think that there's too many needs on this Broncos offense. Offensive line a need, running back a need. I mean, quarterback is probably even a need. Like, the Broncos aren't going to want to admit it, but quarterback is probably a need, along with wide receiver. I think instead of trading up, if I'm a Broncos, and I am a Broncos fan, I would trade back. I want more day 2 picks. It feels like in this draft class, there are so many players evaluated around the same. Like, from what I've seen in the mock drafts from like 16 to 50. Like it's not a huge talent discrepancy there. So I would rather trade down and acquire more day 2 picks than I would trade up for any single player in this draft.
Yeah, I'd almost say to like not to like have too out of a take. I know we did our 2 receiver episodes, but kind of after like thinking back about it, I don't think this receiver class is very good. I don't think this draft class on the super high end is very good, but I don't think this one, like, I think there's a lot of quality receivers. Don't get me wrong. But when I look at it, I'm like, damn, like there's teams mocking like Quentin Johnston in like the top 10, 15, which, you know, that's just like the public right now. People just like him because he gets a lot of the highlights and, you know, that's what it is. But like, man, like when I look at some of the receiver classes we've had in the past like 4 years, like this one is not on the same tier. I think you can maybe argue that. Like, I think you can argue that Jordan Addison is kind of on that like elite-ish tier, but even me and you were saying like I still have some questions about him. I don't know if he's necessarily like a talent that's going to come in and just be super incredible right away. I think he'll be very good, but like, you know, I think JSN will be a talented guy, but I don't know if he's going to be a superstar. Where like you're saying, like I just don't know if there's going to be a guy that people want to move up for.
I'm right with you on that take, Frankie. And hey, let's move on to the next one here. We named our whole show after this question here. And that one comes off from Joe Rouse, Joe_NFL. I encourage everyone to go follow Joe for sure. Definitely,
shout out Joe Roll.
Definitely shout out to him. He gave me a big break in this at the beginning. He helped me out a ton. So shout out to Joe Rouse.
Me as well.
Yes, there we go.
That's the boy.
Who would y'all take if Denver had their top 5 pick? I find this question extremely interesting. I love this question. This is probably my favorite question of the night. So, Frankie, I want to tackle this from 2 perspectives. Let's say they had a top 5 pick. They still had Russell Wilson, and then let's also go with they have their own top 5 pick, and they never made that Russell Wilson trade. I want to tackle that from both angles there. So go ahead. I don't know which one you want to go with first, but go ahead.
Let's do both with the Russ, and then we'll do both without the Russ.
Okay,
that sound good? So with Russ, I think the pick right now, man, like this is kind of what I mean. Where if you're not taking like a guaranteed, like my pick will probably be Jalen Carter, who everybody's in love with, and I think Jalen Carter would be a good option. But even him, I'm a little bit like, oh man, like. When we look at what the current team is Jalen Carter really going to turn this team from what it is right now into?
I love Jalen Carter though, man.
I love him too.
So
but like,
good.
So obviously, right? It's the argument for the future investment. So I think he'll probably be the pick for me. I think they again need that interior defensive line presence. But I mean, it depends upon where they are, because if they're like 4 or 5, you could see both quarterbacks gone and Jalen Carter, and then you're left with Will Anderson, who's still very good. You know, or. You know, it's kind of one of those situations where, like we were talking about earlier, where you might end up going a defensive prospect. Who would you go if they have Russ on the roster?
I'm right there with you, Frankie. I would go with Jalen Carter. I mean, so last year when I was studying that Georgia defense, which is probably going to go down in history. Like, I think we're going to be looking at that Georgia defense last year is I don't know if anyone's watched that 30 for 30 Miami film, but they show like the photo shoot of the whole team, and they're circling NFL players all over the team. But that Georgia defense is going to be very similar. Like, we're going to be looking back at that defense, and we're going to be like, whoa, that defense was insane. And guys, I was watching that defense last year, and we're talking with Wyatt and Davis also playing the same position at Jalen Carter. I was saying Jalen Carter is probably the best pound for pound player on that defense last year. Like that number 88 on that interior defensive line. I was messaging everyone. I was like, who is this? Who's number 88? Tell me about him. Is he really highly thought of? Because I'm watching him and he's been amazing. I don't know. I think Jalen Carter is an animal. I think he's a game changer on defense. He's not just someone that stops the run, but he's also a guy that gets after the passer. He has a whole package of moves he can put together. Jalen Carter is that guy. So I would definitely go with Jalen Carter there if I knew we did have Russ. And it's a little crazy, right? Because the Broncos defense doesn't need much, guys. I think after the first 4 picks, there's a massive drop-off. That's my take there. You have CJ Stroud, Bryce Young. The reason they're in that conversation is because they're quarterbacks.
Yeah.
The real two top players in this draft are Jalen Carter and Will Anderson. That's it. Those are the two best players. And if I'm in that position, I want one of them because the drop-off is so big, I think, from them. Mm-hmm. They're the blue chip players in this class. Those two right there. So I would say you have to go with one of them or trade back. There's no in between there for me.
No, and I think a big thing of it too is like what's really hard about this year is like I was saying, like there's no prospect that I don't think you can put a hole in, and I think outside of Jalen Carter. And even, like right now, people are trying to put the personality concerns. I'll wait until every team interviews him a plethora of times before that's actually a real concern of mine. I'm never gonna, I'm not gonna end up meeting the guy, so I'm not gonna pretend Todd McShay's report might be really very real, but I'm not too worried about it at this point.
I gotta say though, Frankie, before you go, I need someone to provide the evidence before.
Yep. Exactly.
I hate that. It drives me nuts.
Multiple sources.
Okay, so you brought this up, and this is going to bring me fired up real quick. But
there we go.
Hey, if you're going to say so-and-so has character concerns, at least tell us why. You don't just, hey, I don't know, I heard he has some character concerns. I don't want to hear all of that. You got to tell me why, or I'm going to move on and say that's not true. I need evidence before you're just going to go start dragging someone's and a kid's name through the mud. I'm not gonna engage in that. But carry on.
Yeah, no, completely accurate. But I was just gonna say, like, I think the big thing about the top of this class is you can put holes in a lot of these prospects, and you can put major holes in a lot of these prospects. Like Will Anderson, for example. I think a lot of people love Will Anderson. Will Anderson is awesome. Will Anderson is a little bit slender of a frame, and he misses a lot of tackles. Straight up. That's just the facts from the tape. He is not a perfect edge prospect. Bryce Young is undersized for a quarterback prospect. That is just a point blank thing on his resume that I think a lot of people are going to have to deal with. He's one of the smaller QBs that are going to come out. CJ Stroud isn't very good outside of a setup system. He's not too good at making plays on his own. And I think when you look at that, it's kind of like, man, those are the probably top four guys. I think outside of those guys, like you look at some of the guys like Keely Ringo, who's a corner that I think a lot of people are going to love, and I think could end up going top 10. Keely Ringo is not as good as like Sauce Gardner was last year or Patrick Surtain or a lot of these corners that end up going in the top 10. It's just kind of like this year is a little bit lighter, guys. Like I can't lie. I think there's a lot of quality, but it's a quality over quantity year. And I think one thing that we were both touching on is if this question had the capability of trading back, I think trading back is a definite thing you'd want to do here. If you had this current roster,
but here's the issue. I always worry this with trade backs is like, I think every NFL team, like if you're a smart NFL team, I say this and I'm not like an NFL GM, but I would say that this is a trade back year. Like you're going to want to trade back in this class. After those first four, it's like, unless you have a guy circled at a specific position that you really like and you cannot miss on that guy, it's a trade back year. Now, here's the issue with that. The same way the Broncos are thinking about that, I think that there's probably 31 other teams looking at this draft class thinking that. Making the trade backs less valuable and right? Because if everyone's looking to trade back, you're not going to get as much from a team.
I was going to ask this. So what do you I guess this kind of goes into the next question of if they don't have Russ. And this kind of, I guess, gets into the thoughts on Will Levis, which I don't know if you've watched. I haven't really watched too much, but I kind of know about the things I've seen, and I don't love Will Levis. I think if you can get a team kind of sniffing on that juice and kind of looking to move up on the Will Levis hype maybe, or the Anthony Richardson hype, I think maybe that could end up happening. If we're talking they have like the 5th pick or like the 6th pick or something, where it's like.
It's a good point, Frankie.
I wonder if that's possible, but
I agree with you 1,000%, but what I think that does is it pushes those guys up the draft class. That's what I think it does. I think it's going to end up pushing the quarterbacks that people are intrigued by closer to the front, closer to the top of the draft. Mm-hmm. I think that teams are going to be more willing to take a risk on a quarterback if the guys that are available they don't like crazy amount. Like it's not like, you know what I mean? Like they're gonna be more apt to take a risk there.
No, I agree. I think there's gonna be some surprises in this first round this year. I mean,
it's gonna be really hard to mock. It's gonna be really hard to mock. It's gonna be a really hard class to mock. But let's move on to the second part of this question. So who would you, Frankie, let's say they don't have Russell Wilson. Are you going still with Jalen Carter? Do you not like the quarterbacks this much?
I'm taking Bryce Young. I think I would take Bryce Young.
Bryce Young
side of the coin. And I would go Bryce Young against CJ Stroud because right now I think the Broncos offense is an absolute mess. And I think CJ Stroud is the better prospect, and this might sound silly, but I just think Bryce Young is better to come in and stabilize your offense with his ability to make plays, to extend plays, to create plays. He's a lot like Russ. Well, a lot like a good version of Russ, where, like he's kind of a guy that can kind of make your offense at least average when it's bad. You can kind of make the pieces around it look a lot better. And I'm talking about the previous Russell Wilson, not the one of this year so much. But, it's just kind of like, I think he's the guy that can come in. I don't think you necessarily need to have a super good offense already in place for him to kind of hit the ground running. And I don't know, I think you can build a good offense around him. I think he offers a little bit more of that running ability, though he doesn't really use it too much in college. I think he offers a little bit more than Stroud. But who would you go with the top 5 pick?
Okay. I have a different perspective on this than you, Frankie. I won't lie. I would go CJ Stroud. And while I agree with your perspective on it, because I agree that Bryce Young is probably more apt to do better early. I'm still taking CJ Stroud because I think as a GM, I have to think that I'm going to be able to fix this. That's the reason why. I feel like if I'm a GM sitting in the chair, I'm going to be saying, I'm going to at least make this good enough to have a quarterback behind there that I'm not going to just pass up on a quarterback because they can't play make like him. I'm going to draft the guy I think is better. So I'm going to go with CJ Stroud. Now, do I love it? No, I think CJ Stroud is amazing in some of his processing. His eyes have been good since I've started watching CJ Stroud last year. Like he's able to throw defenders completely off with his eyes. Right? He's amazing processor. He throws an on-time and accurate ball. I will say, though, there is no physical quality that really stands out. He's adequate at a lot of things. He's good at a lot of things. But is he over the top at any physical aspect? No, I don't think so. So do I love it? No. But in the scenario, if I'm the sitting GM and I'm George Payton, I'm sitting there thinking my job's on the line. I need to be able to. I need to take a quarterback here and buy me some time. I need to make sure that I get one. I'm going to take the best one. So I'm going with CJ Stroud there.
That's fair.
Okay. Cool. All right. This one.
I have one last question about the top 5. Would you consider Paris Johnson with the top 5 pick?
No.
Well,
okay. Maybe it's the 5th. Maybe if it's the 5th.
I've had a really hard time with that one because I think that'll be kind of the guy that people will be like, oh, well, there's the tackle that should be taken top 10. But it's kind of like, man, you look at the tackles that gone top 10 in the previous years, and I'm not trying to take anything away from Paris Johnson. He has all the tools. But you look at like just some of the tackles that have gotten to go top 10 in previous years, and it's like, man, like, is he better than those guys as prospects? I don't know. But this, not to say it, the top of this class kind of sucks.
We have a question, or we not a question, or we do have a question here. Dal, he says, I think the Broncos need to take a page from the Titans offense to maximize Russ. Obviously, we need to buff the O-line, but we need a Derrick Henry. You guys see anyone like that in this year's draft? And then that's also going to carry us to our next question here as well, Frankie, from mdub_21. He asked, if Bijan is there when the Broncos pick, I'm assuming it's going to be the mid-20s area, maybe late 20s, somewhere in there, I would say. If Bijan is there, do you pull the trigger?
It depends upon the rest of the board, but there's a good chance. I've really gotten to the point where, like, I just want Denver at the 20th pick to get a player that I think is good. I know that's a very hard thing to say, but I want a player that I can be like, man, this guy I think can be good. I do not really care about position at this point, as silly as that's going to sound to a lot of people. I want a really talented player. I don't want a guy that we're thinking, oh, this guy's a potential piece that in 2 years we can maybe see him as the starter. I want a guy I want a high floor guy, if that's fair. And I think Bijan fits that mold perfectly. And if he's the best player available, which I think there's a good chance he is, again, as I've described, not a great class. And I think Bijan is here's the thing. If they're picking 20, let's say they're picking 24 and Bijan is there. No, I don't think anyone can argue that Bijan is not one of the 24 best players, if not 24 best offensive players, if you're just wanting to improve the offense. I don't think you can make that argument. I think he is easily one of those. And yeah, that's my argument. I'm down to make it. And then I can touch on Dales later in a second.
So this one's really tough for me, guys. I won't even lie to you. I go back and forth about this all the time. People have brought up some really good points about it. I think it makes the Broncos offense better right now because I think the better Broncos run game you will see, the better you get with the Broncos run game, I think the better Russell Wilson you will get. But honestly, I've moved past that and I've said, okay, I don't really believe in Russell Wilson right now. I don't. I'm not drafting because of Russell Wilson. I'm not going to do that. Now, Bijan is an interesting one because he is pound for pound. If you're taking positional value away, I would say that he's a top 5 player in this class. Yeah. I would say that. If not 3 or maybe even 2. I think that he's that talented of a running back. Mm-hmm. Bijan Robinson is amazing. I mean, I was part of the campaign that was saying that if I were Bijan, I probably wouldn't even have played this year because he showed enough last year to say that he should have been.
He's ready,
running back 1. Yeah, totally. But I do also have to acknowledge the running back factor of this, which is why he probably won't be a top 5 drafted player, right? Mm-hmm. Because those running backs, their career span in the NFL is so much shorter. The running back is not a position that I want to give a second contract to almost ever, unless it's really low. I'm talking, and that's in years. I don't want to give him Bijan the Zeke deal where it's oh, we're offering you a 6-year deal. I don't want to do that with any running back after their rookie year, or after their rookie contract is up. So it's a weird one. Is Bijan in the first round at pick, let's say 25, worth 5 years? That's pretty much what I'm looking at. That's the way I always look at running back, and that's where it gets tricky. Now, I just got done saying at the same time that in this draft class, it seems like the talent from pick 15 to pick 60, the talent is not that far off. And if I'm getting a top 5 player that I do think's talent is very high, I think he's one of the better running back prospects we've seen in a while, I would definitely have to consider it. I definitely would. I don't know if I pull the trigger. I would have to know who's on the board, but it makes it really interesting.
Yeah. So let me. I've got a couple little points just to counter your point a little bit. I think for the 5 years argument, because I think that is a very good one, but I also I struggle with it because I'm usually in your boat with the running back, but then I also see the other side of it where if you can get 5 quality years out of a first round pick, I think that should be seen as more of a success than I think a lot of fans will see it, where it's if you can get 5 solid years. But then my other point would be, I don't think that getting a running back like Bijan Robinson has to be a move just for Russ, because I don't think Bijan Robinson just improves your running game. I think he's the type of player that can also help you in the pass game. I think if you look towards Denver having to move on to a rookie quarterback in 2024, I think a lot of fans hope for, in a Caleb Williams, I think a guy like Bijan Robinson helps him a ton, more than any of the, again, not to bash any of the receivers, but any of the receivers you're going to be getting at 25 that might be the 5th or 6th receiver in the class. Bijan Robinson's probably the first running back in the class. He's just stamped on it, the number 1 back in the class. That will help your quarterback, who you have for the next 5 years, whoever it is,
Okay.
Matter if it's just
I agree with you, Frankie. Do have to point this out, though. Taking a running back, while the success rate is higher than other positions, undoubtedly, right? That's why a lot of people say don't draft a running back in the first round. I'm going to add on to that and say, if a running back is drafted in the first round, you better pray to God that guy comes in and he is a productive player, which to me adds risk to the conversation. No.
Yes, because that's a
if
good
you
point.
draft him, he better. It's not just draft good. I want great. I'm looking at. I need a top 5 guy if I'm drafting a running back in the first round, which adds some sort of risk to it, right? Because we see prospects all the time. Running back has a good hit rate, but if I'm looking at, I need a top 7, 8 guy in the NFL at his position if I'm drafting him here. I think that needs to be incorporated into why it is a bigger risk. I don't know. Do you agree with me?
No, I completely agree, and I think you're completely right, because I mean that's an argument I've had against it too, where we've seen guys like Saquon get drafted, and Saquon was very good right away, but then what was it, his second or third year he started enduring the injuries, where I think the injuries, like, you don't want to say, like, I got into a little bit of a spat with a guy where we were discussing how the Javonte injury this past year has kind of scared me a little bit with early running backs. I think we can all agree that Javonte was incredibly talented, but when you have these, like, running backs just get hurt a lot. It's not me trying to act like they get hurt more than other positions, but like they kind of do. Like the guys carrying the ball and getting hit, and especially when you have players that are these elite talents at back, usually what they're really good at is making guys miss. So those guys usually go harder to bring them down, which leads to injuries. We see it all the time. And it's kind of like when you can draft a guy in the 6th round. And I guess here, let me counter my own argument.
Okay, go ahead, Frankie. I'll let you go.
This is a good running. My last point on this is a good running back class too. So I think that you can also find a very talented guy in the later rounds that I'm not going to say is as good as Bijan Robinson, but can create big plays if you have good blocking as well, because I think this is such a deep class at that position. What were you about to say?
No, it's just like, okay, it just seems like he better be really good, because when I sit there, even the Zeke draft, right? I think for the Cowboys, it was between him and Jalen Ramsey. I think it's safe to say Jalen Ramsey probably would have been the better pick. In the Saquon draft, he was the 2nd pick. Now, this Bijan question is different, right? Because we're talking pick 20-something.
Yep.
But in the Saquon draft, and I think teams have learned from this a little bit, because Bijan probably is not that far off of Ezekiel Elliott coming out of college. I don't think, like, and the fact that it's even a conversation, I don't think he'll be there when the Broncos pick, just so everyone knows.
I've thought that more and more, is I don't think there's a chance Bijan is there the more I look at the class. Like, I don't see how teams be like, this guy isn't better than most of these guys that were like, oh, they might need a year or two, or we don't really know what position they're going to line up at, things like that.
Frankie, I'm going to ask you like just 3 questions here, just yes or no, and then we can move on to the next one, because we're like 37.
Let's do it right now.
All right, Saquon Barkley at pick 2, or would you rather have Minka Fitzpatrick?
Probably Minka Fitzpatrick.
All right.
Well, wait. Saquon. Does this include the injuries? Because Minka's been injured. I'd probably go Saquon, actually.
You would go Saquon. Okay. Would you rather have Saquon, or let's go with Roquan Smith?
Saquon.
Okay. Really? Even with the injuries. So through their career right now, you would rather have Saquon's career than Roquan's?
Probably.
Interesting.
I think Saquon's had what, like 3 good years, 2.5?
Yeah. Like okay, so Vita Vea or Saquon?
Okay, probably Vita Vea.
All right. So Vita Vea was picked at pick 12. Jair Alexander was picked at pick 18. I would take Jair. Would you rather have DJ Moore or Saquon Barkley?
That's tough.
And then we'll move on. I don't want to get too much into
this. As prospects, probably Saquon, but DJ Moore right now, like I don't know.
Interesting.
That's
okay.
Tough. Who would you go? Whoa.
I know. I'm just completely avoiding it.
What was your answer for the last one? Because I know you love DJ Moore.
All right. Yeah, I'm like irrationally like confident in DJ Moore. I really am. I think that if he were, I've DM'd this to them privately before, but if I personally think that if DJ Moore were in a really good offense, this guy would be, we're looking at top 10 receiver.
He's an answer for that last question. Who should a team, is he
a receiver? I think I would rather have DJ Moore. I'm going to be honest.
Should Denver trade their 1st round pick for DJ Moore? Should they try to do that? Would you do that, Joey?
No, because the Broncos are unworthy of DJ Moore right now.
Okay, that's That's a good team.
They are absolutely unworthy. They are not in position to be trading for DJ Moore. That he needs someone that can use his yards after catch, because DJ Moore is a player that they can use in the backfield, they can use in the slot, they can use on the outside. And I don't think he's just good. I think he's really good at everywhere.
I don't know if he returns, but anyone else that returns.
Exactly. I think DJ Moore is a really solid player. Let's move on to our next comment here. Cameron Parker of Predominantly Orange. Shout out Cam. Said, what is a wild card position the Broncos could use for their first round selection?
You go first.
Okay, I kind of already hit this earlier. I think interior defensive line. I think that's a wild card position. With Draymond Jones' contract coming up, the questions are up in the air on what the situation is looking like there. I would go with interior defensive line. I want to go to the comments real quick, though. Wayne King says, we need O-line regardless. Without it, running back does not matter. And I wanted to hit on that before we got too far away from the running back conversation. He also says, if we are stuck with Russ, we need to provide a line that could give him all day to throw. We also need a strong line that can open holes in the line for backs that can hit it quick. I totally agree with you, Wayne. I think that the Broncos need to improve their O-line drastically, and that will help a ton. A lot of it does have to do with Russ and how many sacks he takes and how long he takes to get through certain stuff. And I agree with you, though, at the end of the day. I think O-line will help the running game. I think the better running game, I've said this earlier, the better running game the Broncos have, the better Russ we will see. So I 1,000% agree with him. I think O-line is a massive, massive need.
No, and I'll say, too, a big thing to keep in mind is if they do draft a tackle, first of all, temper expectations. Think about what Garrett Bowles was like as a rookie. What was he drafted? 29, 30, 31. He was drafted late in the first. That's typically the type of tackle you're getting in the first. They take a couple of years. They might be like an athletic prodigy or something that you can kind of mold into a tackle you like. But typically the prospects. So that's the reason, I guess, for this question. I like going, if there's an interior offensive lineman that they really like, if Peter Skoronski ends up, the entire league says this guy's a guard and they drop him to the early 20s and he's for some reason there, love that pick. Yeah, that was all I was going to say. But
and the Broncos, for real, start doing outside zone instead of acting like they're about to.
Right. I think that's a good answer. But then my wild card position, this one's going to be spicy for everybody, just because I upset some people on the twits when I said this one. I think tight end, just because this is a really good tight end. I do not know how to tell people this, and it's only because some of these players are labeled as tight ends when I don't necessarily know if they're tight ends. Perfect example. Michael Mayer, Notre Dame.
I love Michael Mayer. Yeah,
this guy can be semi-considered a big slot guy. He plays kind of a little bit like Gesicki, where he's not always lining up as an inline guy. He gets used as a receiving target a lot. He is a guy where if he's available, I know everyone loves Greg Dulcich. Believe me, I love Greg Dulcich. There's a lot of formations that use multiple tight ends, guys. I'm going to let you know that right now. Update, breaking news. You can use multiple tight ends in an offense, what do you got?
Frankie, I want to know, do you agree with me that Michael Mayer, pound for pound, is probably a top 10 prospect?
Easily. I think easily. And here's the thing. Here's the craziest thing. He might not be the best tight end in this class. Boom. Dalton Kincaid is probably better. Okay. I genuinely think
he's better than
I think Dalton Kincaid. Well,
I need to watch more of him.
It depends how you look at a tight end. Wow. I think Michael Mayer is probably the better receiving option. I think Dalton Kincaid is probably a little bit better rounded right now.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
And I think, and then the crazy thing, you got Darnell Washington, who could take the Trayvon Walker route, and people think this guy could be the best of all of them because he's an alien. When you have a guy that just should be playing like small forward in the NBA, but for some reason he's playing tight end in the NFL, and he's also got 30 extra pounds on him, that guy is going to go pretty high. And he also apparently runs really fast. There's a lot of options at tight end that I think that's an area that I think would really help the offense. And if you can have multiple, that's my wild card tight end.
The same way, or the same reason why a guy like Mercedes Lewis has had a career for as long as he does, where I feel like I've been watching him for like, I don't know how long he's been in the NFL, but I feel like I've been watching him for like since I first started watching football. I feel like I've been watching Mercedes Lewis play football is the reason why Darnell Washington is going to be very, very coveted. I just thought I'd throw that out there for the people that don't know. He's like an extra blocker on the line of scrimmage. He's massive, while also being a contributor in the pass game. He's not just a blocker. It feels like that's the reason the Broncos picked up an Eric Tomlinson, for example, right?
Yeah.
Is to have him out there. But you could have a Darnell Washington out. What? That's right. Is that his name?
It's Darnell Washington. Yeah.
Darnell Washington. I'm sorry. I get confused. You can use him out there, and he's not a liability in the pass whatsoever. He's an addition in the pass while also being a massive help in the run. Mm-hmm. So if you're a team looking for a tight end like that, I think he's going to have a career for as long as he wants to have a career, because there's just not guys like him at that size doing what he does. Yeah. But let's move on to the next comment here.
Shout out Cameron Parker for the comment.
Shout out Cam. Jolene asked, if you had to choose between one of the following with the first round pick, who do you take? Will Levis, Michael Mayer, BJ Ojolari, Anton Harrison, Jalen Hyatt, Cam Phillips. Who would you take there, Frankie?
I'm probably going Michael Mayer for a lot of the same reasons I said before. When I'm looking at this, I like Clark Phillips a lot. He'd probably be in second, and then I'd say Hyatt and Ojolari are tied, and then Harrison is like right below them in Levis. But again, I just think it's about, I'm of the mindset that this offseason needs to be spent, and this does not even have to do a lot with Russ. I think that there needs to be a real effort put in, as we've seen the past couple, like we saw George Payton do a really good job last offseason of fixing the pass rush, and he kind of took it apart when he traded away Bradley Chubb, but that was like one of the main things he wanted to look at. He wanted to get a franchise quarterback, and he wanted to really get a bunch of pass rushers, and he did that. This year, I think he really needs to improve the offensive passing game. I don't care how he does it. I don't care if it's getting additional tackles. I don't care if it's adding a bunch of receivers in the bodies in the receiving room. I don't care if it's adding tight ends. I don't care if it's adding a better backup quarterback, because he doesn't know if Russ is going to be able to play 17 games. I do not care. He needs to add talented bodies to that offense. And again, it's not all about Russ, because I think a big part of it is there just needs to be competency in this room, guys. Something I'm so concerned about is these great rookie classes, or, last year's wasn't perfect, but these rookie classes that we're all super hyped about over these past few years, they're getting absolutely wasted. They are having to go through 17 coaches before they leave Denver, and that's hyperbole. But, look at Quinn Miners, man. I feel so bad for this guy. This guy, shedded weight to be able to fit into this new scheme this year, he's trying to fit into a scheme that he doesn't really like. He's clearly way better playing in these gap power schemes, not even trying to bash him. He just is a better player in that stuff. Now he's having to do this. Now next year, he's going to be on his third offensive line coach. This guy might as well have kept training himself in the woods, bro. He's getting random people coaching him. He's going to have, he's going to be on another offensive line coach. I'm tired of this for all of the positions that I would just really like them to just find some balance, find some footing on the offense, not have to reset every couple of years, because it's just such a shit show every year. And I think when you bring in players like Michael Mayer, or we were talking about with Bijan Robinson, I think he helps you do that. I think he's good enough on his own without needing too much coaching. And then he has the ceiling that you can look to make him into a super good piece without it having to be, okay, maybe he's got a good coach his first year. Who knows who his second coach is going to be or his second coach is going to be? Who knows who his third coach is going to be? And now we have to decide if we're going to give him a contract or not, So I guess that's kind of a little bit of my argument for Mayer. How about you?
Okay. Frankie, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to say this while people don't know about the draft and I get no pushback. It feels like in a regular draft, I am looking at players that are either very bottom of the first round or second round, and then also Michael Mayer. That is the reason why I think that's also the reason why I think I'm going with him. I like a lot of these players, but I just, man, when I'm looking at, and people are going to hate this because tight end probably isn't the most valuable position. You know what I mean? It's really not. Like, there's a lot of other positions where if there were a player even a step behind, I'd probably, in positional value, I'd probably take them. I just think that with Michael Mayer, I'm looking at a player that is a top 10 player in this draft, in my opinion. I think he's that good, and I think he's that really good of a tight end prospect. Tight end is one of those few positions, as you highlighted early, Frankie, that looks strong in this draft class. And from what I've seen so far, he's my number one tight end.
Mm-hmm.
So if he were there, I would take him over all these guys. And it's not taking away from these other players because I like him. I like Harrison out of Oklahoma, the offensive tackle. Really strong hands, really good. There's a lot to work on, though. Whereas I think Michael Mayer, while I just think that he's the best player available, and I don't think it's that close.
No.
So that's why I think I would go with him.
No, and I will say teams will probably fall in love with Jalen Hyatt. He's going to have one of those freak RAS scores, where he's just stupid fast, and teams love that. But, like Joey's saying, Michael Mayer is just so pro-ready. So I think he is the obvious answer for me. He makes this offense better. Him and Greg Dulcich would combine to be one of the better tight end rooms in the NFL, probably. In my opinion, that would probably be one of the better tight end rooms in the league, and you'd have them both on rookie contracts.
There you go. And then we have one last question here, and he asked this today, so we don't have it all written out, but shout out to Pat. I just saw him this last week. Shout out to Pat. Really, really, really great guy. He says, what position would you guys say is the strongest in this class? Which one would you say is the weakest? He said, yeah, so you don't have to give an exact one, but what do you think is a strong one, and what do you think is a weak one?
I'm going to say running back, I think, is the strongest position. I think there are so many good running backs this year. It's actually kind of crazy. I think there's a lot of guys that have had just insane senior seasons. We've seen so many guys that can just break these insane runs, and they're just super fast. I think, as we've said, Bijan Robinson is a comparable to Saquon Barkley level prospect, where he's just very good. And yeah, I think running back's one of those. And I also think that the other positions that a lot of people have kind of have been stronger in the previous years, I think a lot of people usually expect to be good, such as receiver, offensive tackle usually seems like it has a few. I think those are a little bit weaker this year, and I think that kind of boosts it a little bit. So I'm going to go with running back for the strongest. How about you?
I think I would go either tight end or running back too. And it's funny I say that because and I haven't studied safety. I haven't studied too much. I have to throw that out there. This is from what I've seen so far. Mm-hmm. I have only seen what I've seen. so I've studied most of the offensive positions. Frankie and I are going to start breaking down running backs this next week. And I started getting that today. Running backs is just a fun position to study. It's just a really fun one. And it looks loaded. It does look loaded. So I would, from the position I've seen, I would go either tight end or running back. What do you think is the weakest?
I'm not sure. Hold on. Let me. I'll probably go.
Refresh your memory.
I'll go off-ball linebacker. I don't think there's a ton of great off-ball linebackers.
Interesting. Okay.
Off the top of my head, I
haven't started studying them yet.
I know there's Campbell. I know that I think there's a couple. I think there's one or two Alabama guys. I don't know too many good off-ball linebackers this year. So boom, any off-ball linebacker prospects that want to come at me and tell me that I'm wrong, do that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. How about you?
I don't know, because I haven't gone really deep into a lot of these positions. I've just studied the top. From the top of the draft, I would probably say and I've only studied offense so far. I would say from the top, it's not that loaded at offensive tackle, I will say.
I think that's fair. No, I think that's totally fair, honestly. I think there's a lot of pieces, but there aren't a lot of and there's a lot of guys, I think you mentioned that, or I don't remember who mentioned this, but someone's been saying there's a lot of guys I think that are going to get consideration at guard this year, and not just one of those years where it's is this guy a guard? Is just a joking thing. I think, as we've mentioned, Skoronski's a guy with short arms. I've heard mentions that Darnell Wright people might like more at guard, which I don't really that doesn't make sense to me, but I think people might be saying that one.
I like him so much more than I just want to throw that out there.
Darnell
I like him
Wright.
so much more than other people like Darnell Wright. I really do. Like it's really crazy.
We gotta
like,
get signed Darnell Wright jerseys in the back once he gets drafted. That would be the move.
I like him so much more than other people like him. I need to hear more valid reasons as to why.
I haven't heard any. I really haven't. Like,
yeah. Before we get out of here, Frankie, because I think that was our last question of the night. Wayne comments. He said, I would like to see just see some linemen that can hold their own and not get pushed back 3 or 4 yards on every play. Could also explode off the line on run plays. Is there anyone out there? I highlight this comment because you were just talking about Darnell Wright. Do you think he fits that little message that Wayne sent?
Darnell Wright fits that. There's actually a few centers I like this year that will fit that, but we will, we'll be touching on the interior offensive line in another episode. You'll have to turn back in, but I will say Denver had one, in Netane Moody, who was looking pretty good against Chris Jones, who was winning one-on-ones. He was climbing well. He was hitting his landmarks. He was doing all the stuff I like. He's giving help in the pass game when he was finding work. But no. We're trying to play a backup center over him. We're trying to play a backup tackle over him. I just had to get that out. I cannot believe that we had a guy that on the first depth chart was listed as the backup left guard. He was healthy when our starting left guard was out. And we played our rookie, 6th or 7th round backup center, and then a guy who's 27 who never has taken a snap at left guard. And I'm not bashing Quinn Bailey or Luke Wattenberg at all. Those guys deserve to have an opportunity where they can put out good tape on themselves without playing a position they've never taken a snap at the NFL. That's bullshit to them. It's bullshit to Netane Moody. I hate you, Butch Berry. I'm upset. So there we go. That's my rant on Netane Moody for the evening. I can't. He's a Raider now. What are we doing?
I put out the poll this week, Frankie, or not a poll. I just asked the question. I was like, "Who is your favorite offensive coach on the Broncos?" And it was really just to prove the point that there's none. and yeah, Butch Berry. Literally everything I've heard so far from other people that are closer, from anybody that I think is really knowledgeable, nobody likes. I haven't heard a single thing that's like, oh, that's good.
There's been countless confusing decisions along the offensive line, but whatever. Yeah, that's for another time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, that was our last question there. Wayne says, so true. Shout out to Wayne. Shout out to Wayne. We always appreciate you being here, Wayne. But yeah, Frankie, where can they find your awesome work, man?
Frankie's Film on Twitter. That's who I am. That's who I is. I post videos. I post clips of all the players. I post my tweets, the thoughts on the team. I post on Mile High Report. I have an article dropping tomorrow, which will be like a little film recap of last week's game. You might get to see some Netane Moody film and be like, wow, this guy looks pretty good. Maybe he'll be our guard if Dalton Risner gets hurt. Just kidding, he's gone. But I'm also on TikTok, Frankie's Film NFL. I post the exact same clips you'll see on Twitter. You can see them on there if that's easier for your scrolling pleasure. I'm on here every Thursday with Joey. Make sure you tune in. And yeah, shout out everyone who sent in questions, guys. It was really awesome seeing the response and everyone who's gotten to tune into this, because this has been pretty sweet and a pretty good time just getting to interact with everybody a little bit more. Have a little bit more of a free form pod without just having to tell you guys all the dirt on these prospects.
Exactly. Hey, well, guys, find all my work at JR Drafts. Make sure you are checking out Frankie's work. Frankie does amazing work at Mile High Report. He's an awesome writer. He's pushing out Broncos content literally every single week, so make sure you go check him out for sure. Next week, Frankie and I will be breaking down running back prospects, which I'm really excited to dive into. Like, it's just fun. I'm gonna start just looking at names and studying them. Like, I don't care how high they're ranked. The day 3 running back scouting is peak NFL draft scouting. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna even include some guys that maybe you haven't have heard of yet. So yeah, make sure you're checking out all of that. You can find my writing at Mile High Sports. So until next time, guys, though, Frankie, any final parting words?
Not really. Follow Joey, follow Zach Seegers, follow Bree Maestas,
yes, sir.
Follow everybody, follow the whole LTB crew, follow Robbie Davis, Robbie NFL.
Robbie.
Robbie. Shout out to the whole team.
All right, see you guys.
Everybody, and yeah.